Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Wandering Podcast, where we take advisement from outside the box. I'm Rihanna Ritter, your host. I'm an intuitive, sexuality, and authentic expression coach. Are you an accomplished professional who plays the part of having it all figured out? Who's strong for everyone else but feels lonely, misunderstood, like you can't tell anybody the truth about how stressed you are, how not passionate you are about your life and all that you've created? I guide my clients to deep, lasting fulfillment. I re-engage them with their bodies, their pleasure, their desire. I help them align to enjoy fulfillment and prosperity in all areas of their lives.
Today, my guest is Deanne Rose Hope Riendo. She is owner of Rose Hope Inc., in which she helps those who are seeking heaven on earth by teaching them how to use their gifts of intuition and to master the mind. And you're a reverend and a spiritual mentor, isn't that right?
It's right. Yeah. I went on my journey around, who am I? What am I supposed to do in this world? And I was called to this concept of spirituality and metaphysics. And so I am a reverend of metaphysics, which encompasses kind of the whole gamut of spirituality and connection and belief systems. So yeah, it's been a real interesting road for me, that's for sure.
Oh, that's amazing. So, would you say that you grew up in a household that encouraged the gifts, using the gifts of intuition and spiritual gifts, or was it a religious household? What kind of upbringing did you have?
So I was raised Catholic, and for those of you that have experienced Catholicism on some level, I had a God that was far away from me, and one that would punish me if I didn't do right. So I lived with a lot of guilt and shame. That was kind of my MO growing up. And the more guilty I felt about doing something quote unquote wrong, then the more I would be forgiven and the more worthy I was. So I very much lived in that space. And although my parents were so loving, my mom, was so good about encouraging me and really supporting me. But when I was 5 years old, I had a near death. So I choked on a jawbreaker candy, and my dad, came running over, did the Heimlich, but he could not get that candy out. And so I went completely unresponsive, and I actually had an out of body experience when I was just 5. So I remember watching my dad panicking, trying to get this candy out of my mouth, get me breathing again. I remember watching my mom run to the phone to call for help, but I didn't feel any of that chaos. Like I felt bliss and I felt love. I just felt so good just floating there, watching this, this chaos below. And my dad actually ended up pushing against my throat with his thumb, and he was able to get the jawbreaker out, which by the way is not recommended because you can push that back in, but he was desperate at the point. And he got the jawbreaker out and obviously got me breathing again. So after that is when my intuition, my gifts started to really come to the surface. So I would wake up in the morning and I would have had a precognitive dream or a psychic dream. And I'd say, Mom, so-and-so died last night in my dream. And her jaw would like hit the floor because she'd be like, how did you know? I just got off the phone with the so-and-so who died, like, or whatever. So goosebumps talking about it because these things started to happen. And I don't think my mom knew what to do. So she would just tell me just to pray. So that's what I would do is I would pray. I would say the Lord's Prayer. I also started to have very lucid dreams at that time. So I'd have sleep paralysis where I'd be awake, but in the dream. And some of the dreams were very traumatic and very scary. And so mom would say, okay, we'll just pray. So, I'd say the Lord's Prayer and, it would work for the most part. But I also felt like because my mom didn't know quite what to do with me, when I would have some of these visions and things, I felt like it was making her uncomfortable. So I shrunk that up. Right. I thought, okay, she doesn't really know what to do. Maybe that's not good. Maybe I'll just hide it. So I kept my intuition very locked away, and I started to be more quiet about some of the things I was seeing and experiencing. And so taking me through junior high and high school, feeling really uncomfortable in this world. I felt really out of place, and I felt like, oh, nobody gets me. Or do I just think about things differently than other people? Like, am I weird? Am I crazy? All those things. And so, there was a lot of those questions that happened in my upbringing. And ultimately that led me into this beautiful spiritual journey of who I was, and, what my conditionings and what my beliefs that I was taught as a child, and how that maybe wasn't necessarily true for me.
I can so relate to that because I was, as a child, kind of like talking with some spirits, and some of them were pretty scary. And my parents, I was raised Jehovah's Witness. My parents were terrified. So they were like,
Right?
what you need to do is you need to yell. Like, there was no question about whether what I was saying was real or not. It was just like, the demons are visiting you and you need to scream out, in the name of Jehovah, get out. So I also shrunk that. And it's very interesting how our parents, like, it seems like your mom's was more gentle, like it was more of
Yeah.
a, I don't know what to do with you. I just pray, as a tool. And whereas my
Right.
parents were like scared and actively like, turn that off.
Wow. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, very interesting that there was that difference, but I still had fear about the mediumship, and I still had fear about what I was seeing, because in the Bible, it's very clear, like, doing this, being a prophet, whatever, like, you're going to hell. And I was doing research actually for a book that I just finished, called The Ark. And in this research, it was like, okay, are these gifts or are these curses? It was like going through that process of thinking maybe I was just cursed or something was wrong, right? And so as I'm doing this research and pulling from the Bible, it says very clearly, oh my gosh, like, if I keep doing work, like, I'm in trouble. And so I prayed on it and I said, okay, God, give me a sign, like, show me something so clear that I know that I'm on the right path. I need you to show me that I got to complete this book. I need you to show me that what I'm doing is of you and of divinity and all of that. And no word of a lie, Rihanna, it happened instantaneously. As soon as I was done the prayer, a wind gusted the front door of the casita open, and out of line of sight, across a river on top of a hill, was a cross. And that was, oh, goosebumps
Same
again,
here.
because that was that moment, right? Like, that was that moment where I was like, okay, this is what I'm reading here and what I'm doing. They're not the same, and maybe one has some level of truth, but so does the other. So it helped me to come into my gifts more, and instead of pushing them away and saying they were bad, not seeing them as shadow aspects of me, but as light aspects of me. And that changed everything for me. That moment was life-giving.
Oh, I love that. I've had chills so many times already. But yeah, I think what we forget is that, the Bible was inspired by God, meaning inspired, like people wrote it based on their inspiration, their ideas of what God is, but still people wrote it. So there's a human lens
Yes,
that
yes.
that kind of clouds what is written there, and then it's been translated, many times. And so
Many, many
things get
times.
lost in
Yes.
translation, and certain words maybe have not been the we have words in other languages that just, there isn't a direct translation for that word into English or whatever. So
Yeah.
people living, their whole life by the Bible, and it was intentional. Religions did want people disconnected from their own divinity and their own trust in themselves, because that gives religion control and also helps them be
Power.
profitable,
Yeah.
and keeps them as members getting their donations. So we have this thing where people are a little bit lost in, I'm reading this book, I can always trust what the book says, but I can't trust myself. And what we really need in the world is for us to get really connected to our own wisdom and intuition, and prayer is a wonderful way to do that, and so is meditation. And we have,
Yes.
conflicting information about which ways are acceptable to access God. And God
Mhm.
speaks to us, and then we have some messages that say that God doesn't speak to us, and if we say that, then we are like
Right.
delusional and we think too highly of ourselves. And again, that's
Mhm.
another religious message that was passed down to keep control, to keep money
Yes.
flowing into the church.
Yes. Yeah, it's such an interesting thing because I witness it now where it's like, let's put people in fear, let's get them afraid, and then we can have power. And we see it happening in corporations, government agencies. It's rampant. And I think you're exactly right that we need to show people that they can trust their own inner compass, the divine within themselves, right? Just like I said, I was raised with God out here, and now I've found God here. And it's not out of ego in any way. It's out of pure divine relationship, connection, and love that I get to experience the God within me. And it's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
I
so
mean,
beautiful.
we hear all the time, God doesn't make mistakes. Like God is experiencing life through us. We have
Yes.
this unique blend of physical attributes and mental and emotional attributes, and it's a way for the divine to experience life on the physical plane.
It is. And it's a beautiful way to experience life, to know that we have direct access to divinity and it's available at the snap of a finger.
Yeah.
It's such a gift for us to know that, I think.
Before you started Rose Hope, did you have other career paths? How did you get onto this journey of entrepreneurship and, becoming a reverend?
Oh, so this is a great question because I've had lots of careers, and often people are like, "How old are you? How many things have you done?" Well, because of my near death choking, I knew I wanted to save other people. So I became an EMT and firefighter. That was my first career. So at 18 years old, I was dealing with motor vehicle accidents, heart attacks, death, all sorts of things. That grew me up real fast that time. But also energetically speaking, like I remember there was a woman who had passed, and we got called in. It was called in as a DOA, a dead on arrival. So we knew that she had already passed when we got there, but the police needed help with her body, taking pictures and what have you. So I spent a lot of time with this woman's body, but I could feel her spirit. And so I remember thinking, like, what's going on? Like, I'm really losing it, starting to question what was happening to me, right? Because all the things that happened as a kid, remember, I had stored those away, I'd put those away. And so now all of a sudden, here I am in adulthood in my career. I'm going home to have 8 showers because I can't get rid of this woman's energy.
Mm.
And, eventually I did end up leaving that career. I stayed in healthcare, but decided to go back to school to become a dentist. And while I was starting that schooling, my teacher said, "Dan, you belong in the classroom. You should be teaching." So I switched that path and I ended up teaching in emergencies in health sciences for most of my career. I loved teaching, but at the same time, I also had these ideas and these visions. So I started side businesses. So my first side business, I started at 22 years old, and I would go to dental offices and teach them CPR and first aid. So it was a CPR training company. So I started dabbling in business, no idea what I was doing at that age, but that really hooked me in. The life of entrepreneurship was always something that really drew me in. So while I had this teaching career, I also had this teeth whitening company and all these other companies that I had, tried on the side. So always had a side hustle. Fast forward now, I'm in my teaching career and I get introduced to the world of land, real estate investing, also a passion of mine. Started doing that for a while, had my children, and going through the process of having my children was really what shifted things for me. When I had my second child, a son. He was 6 months old. was in postpartum depression. I didn't know it, but I was in it. And I was really struggling because I had a really successful life. I had financial abundance. We would go traveling. I had a wonderful husband, like all the things that, you would think would make a person happy. And I was miserable. I was miserable. I was so empty. And I had been doing everything that I thought I needed to do in my life, like get married, have kids, have a career, like all the things. And from the outside was perceived as very successful. But on the inside, I felt as though I had been dying. You know, that feeling, where you feel like your soul is dying or your spirit's left the building.
Yeah.
And that's where I was. And I was not happy with the work I was doing. I wasn't happy at home. And I felt guilty and shameful for not being happy when I should have been happy. It's like, come on, your life is great. What have you got to be upset about? But I was so unhappy. And so then I was in that guilt and shame of being unhappy. And it got to me so deeply, Brianna, but I got to a point where I thought, I think I need to leave this world. And so I started thinking about suicide. And I think back and I think, well, you had kids. How could you possibly think that? But that's how much despair and pain I was in that moment. And one night I was in bed and I was deciding how I was going to perform my life ending, that everyone would be better off without me. It was too painful to be in this three-dimensional world and blah, blah. And I prayed, as was my go-to. I said, okay, God, I need you to show me what I'm doing here, because right now this is the path I'm going on. Is there another path? Show me. And another profound experience. God always responds so immediate when it needs to happen. I tell you.
Mhm.
And I had an angel come to me. And at the time I didn't know it was an angel. Now it's very clear to me it was an angel. And this angel came and it said, here's the vision. It showed me this vision of creating this holistic healthcare system and this growing the spiritual community. And so I had this entire vision. I got this whole business downloaded within a matter of minutes. I said to my husband, I said, I'm going to start this business. This is what I'm doing. And he was so happy and excited about it. And that was really what kept me alive, was that vision, that mission to help the world, that people weren't suffering and people weren't like me and going through what I was going through. Like, it was just so incredible. And that's ultimately what led me into my connection with spirit and who I was. And that's what led me down this path to learn about the Akashic records, which is a special area of expertise for me. That's what allowed me to connect with God, led me down the path of metaphysics and that sort of thing. So that really was the beginning of that for my life, where God really took me by the hand and said, okay, you're asking for it. I'll show you. I'll show you the way. And I have listened and let myself be led since that day.
Gosh, that's so amazing. I had a very similar situation where I felt very like from the outside, I was a really good pretender. I was acting like I was happy. I was
Yeah.
doing everything I could to try to feel happy. All the
Yes.
inner work, all the self-help, all the journaling and the, finding community and all the things. And finally, just I think community kind of showed me, for me, my marriage was not aligned, and we are different people that really weren't encouraging each other's
Yeah.
gifts. That needed to be the thing that went. And when I finally realized that, like, everything switched and it was great. So I totally feel you on knowing what it feels like to have everything that you're supposed to have and to do everything right the way that people have said to do it, and then to feel completely empty. Because when you're
Right?
denying your soul's path, it doesn't matter what's outside of you.
It really
It's
doesn't.
just,
And I love that we have so many similarities in our story, because I too left that husband, by the way. It wasn't
okay.
healthy, it wasn't aligned. So I too also made that decision as part of my growth and as part of my journey. But it's so interesting because the more I share this with people, the more people are like, oh my God, me too. right?
Yeah.
There's so many of us that have put on the brave face, right? That have
Yeah.
put it together, here's success and what it looks like. And we're starting to realize now, have it figured out, and it's okay that we don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's okay to change our mind. And like my family is totally freaking out because I'm like now this spiritual teacher and coach, and they were so proud of me, my business success, my accounting, they just were like, wow, that is so, what an accomplishment, what an achievement, how respectable. And then the marriage too, they just were really attached to me remaining. I had become this person that they wanted me to become, and they wanted me to stay that way. And we
I know it.
change. And so many
Yeah.
of us think, we put work into a career and education, and we think we can't change. We're not allowed to. Even when we're encouraged to go to college and pick a major at
Yeah.
18, we're supposed to know what we want to do for the rest of our life.
Right? Oh, I know. It seems silly to me. It seems so silly to me because we evolve and we change so, so much, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
explain a little bit about like what the Akashic Records involves?
Oh, yes. Oh, so thank you for asking. The Akashic Records is a space of consciousness that we can step into. So some people say it's the 5D, 7D. It doesn't really matter. I think it's the God frequency. We really are going into your soul's library. We're going into a space of deep connection in order for us to access the most divine information possible. Because you know what happens in our day to day? It's so busy, right? It's like we've got this distraction over here. We've got kids needing us over here. We've got this over here. We've got that over here. So our world is so busy. Sometimes we can't get quiet enough to really get that divine information, divine relationship. And so what the Akashic Records does is it creates the container, the structure, the sacred structure, if you will, where we can go into that space and we can sit and be with God. And so some people might do that through prayer or meditation, but we know that to be the Akash. And so this Akash, this field, this vibration, this consciousness is that space to create that connection and for us to receive information that will guide us and help us so that we're not getting pulled into all the different directions. We're multidimensional beings. Yeah. We've got our God mind, our divine mind, if you will, our higher self, we call it sometimes. And then we've also got the ego mind. And now there's many layers more than that. But to keep it simple, we've got the ego mind. The ego mind is the logical mind that says, don't jump off the cliff or, keeps us safe. But that ego mind also, for thousands of years, has been conditioned to run the show. So for most of us as human beings, it's the ego that tells you like, oh, better put clothes on before you go outside. It's the ego that says also, oh, who do you think you are to go on someone's podcast and share your wisdom? The ego comes in and wants to keep us safe, but unknowingly hijacks us and starts controlling us. And most of us let it. But if we also build a relationship, we befriend that ego mind, then all of a sudden the ego starts to say, oh, okay, maybe I don't need to chime in for that. It starts to get quieter and quieter. And this is the magic, because once the ego knows its place, it stays there. The challenge is most of us don't catch it and get it to put in place. But if we start to build a relationship and we start to have conversation with the ego. So I have even given my ego a name. Her name is Jane. Okay. I've got a girlfriend. She calls her ego the itty bitty shitty committee. You call your ego whatever you want. But the point being is that we're trying to build a loving relationship with it. So we can say, okay, ego, thank you so much for chiming in. I know you're trying to keep me safe, but I've got this. But I'm going to ask that you step aside for this one. So we start putting the ego in place, and eventually it catches on. And what this does is it allows for this opening with our divine mind, with our higher self. because it's oftentimes the ego that comes in that blocks the higher self. You know, when you get an intuitive hit and you're like, oh, I should turn this way. I don't know why, but something tells me I should go this way instead of that way. And you go that way and you're like, oh yeah, I'm so glad I did it. Or you didn't listen to your intuition and you're like, oh man, now I'm stuck here. Why didn't I listen? Right? The
Yeah.
ego wants to come and it wants to tell us that our intuition doesn't know what it's talking about, but it is our intuition that knows way, way more than that ego logical mind does. And so once we build this relationship, then we start to see harmony in our decision making. We start to hear more of that divinity so that we can make more aligned decisions. And so that's the magic. I kind of went on a long-winded roundabout story back to the Akashic records, but the Akashic records allows us to come in as the observer in space and to be able to build those relationships in an amplified, aligned way. So the Akashic records, you know, we can lean into past, present, and future in that space. It's beautiful for clearing past life energy and getting understanding about our lives. You know, one of the sayings I say all the time is, no wonder you feel this way in this life, because when you look at your history, we can see why. It gives us tools for right here now. And it also shows us possible pathways. So these pathways of possibility can be seen from this space. Doesn't mean that we have to take them. It's still a choose your own adventure. And that's the power of utilizing something like the Akashic records to help us to understand things, is that we still ultimately get to keep our personal power. We still get to choose our adventure. And that's the beauty of it. It's this beautiful high vibrational space. I like to tell people that when they get to experience the Akashic records, that they get to experience a soul massage, because
Ooh,
it's such a beautiful thing that we don't do enough of, right? Like, what does it mean to
yeah.
massage my soul? Well, it means to like nurture it in whatever way that is. But that's how people have described their sessions in the Akash. This tool, by the way, anybody can learn to use it. Of course, I love teaching people how to use it for themselves because it's been such a powerful tool for me. But most certainly anybody can do it. That's the beauty. We all have access to this.
Yeah, I love that you described building a relationship with the ego instead of, because there has been, I'd say more in the past, this attitude of destroy the ego. Like we don't want to go to battle with our ego. Our ego is a part of us that's going to remain, whether we like it or not. We want to befriend it and build that relationship with it. And so I love that you pointed that out. And the way you describe the Akashic records is so, it makes it so fun, like the soul massage. It, whereas often in religion we're taught that this is a demonic, scary thing to stay away from. Don't tap into that. And I also feel like plant medicine is a similar journey.
Yeah.
You know, when we connect with the plant teacher, it shows us things that are amazing, astounding. Like one of the messages I got in an ayahuasca ceremony was like, I was like, why the suffering? Why do I keep ending up in these situations? And she was like, because you like it. And I was
Ah,
like,
oh, I
like
know.
slap in the face.
Oh
But it
my God.
was, you know, it had me, you know, lean into that part of myself and really begin to understand, okay, yeah, I'm kind of addicted to this pattern of suffering. I'm kind of addicted to, like, you know how you said the ego is trying to keep us safe. Sometimes our ego mistakes safety with familiarity. And
Uh-huh.
yeah,
True. Yes.
so it's really
Mm.
amazing to take, you know, our society is so go, 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 rush, 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 be productive, that we don't value taking the time to have that God mind, that
Yeah.
relationship with that, and the space to, I mean, we should all be daily taking enough space to hear that mind, because our ego will non-stop with the chatter
Nonstop.
and the inner critic and the all the ways that it shows up.
All the ways. Yes. I love that you're bringing this up too, because, and this idea of the suffering that we cause ourselves, because we're really good at self-punishing, especially if we've been raised in any type of religious upbringing. The self-punishing was a tool of control. So we've been hardwired as well to create our own suffering. And yeah, I've been through some suffering, let me tell you. And it is so powerful when we realize, like, wait a second, there's something about that suffering that I like, or that's doing something for me on some level. And so it's this wonderful opportunity now for us to look at that and say, oh, okay, I'm responsible for it. I get to choose something differently here. And I get to see all of the value in whatever that suffering was now. Now I get to like pull from that and say, okay, why did I allow myself to do that? And most of our suffering comes from attaching to outcomes, to people and experiences. Right? It's like,
Yeah.
oh my God, that relationship ended and now I'm suffering because I've lost it because I was so attached to it in an unhealthy way, whether it's codependency or whatever. And it's so interesting that we have become those suckers for punishment in a way. I recently actually, this just came up on my feed this morning, so I feel compelled to share it. It's by Teal Swan, and it says, people who love themselves pick the path of least resistance. Picking the hard way is not virtuous, it's self-punishment. And I gotta tell you, I've chosen the hard path many, many times, thinking that it was a virtuous path to take because my ego had told me so on one level or another. And how brilliant is it that, wait a second, does it have to be the hard path? And it doesn't. Doesn't.
That really brought, like, last night I was having, I was kind of meditating, and I had this whole like vision come in, and a memory of a friend who I was speaking with at a party, and she had said, spelling, we're casting spells with our words. That's why it's called spelling. And that was the first time I had heard that. And I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. That's profound. Like, of course it is. And we are like all under this spell of, not only, I mean, primarily through religion, teaching us that sacrifice and suffering and the narrow path
Yes.
is the way to be good and virtuous.
Yeah.
And yeah, that actually came in last night. And I was like, oh, we got to get ourselves out from under this spell. And
Yeah.
the best way to do that is to be in as much ecstatic pleasure and joy as we can be.
Yes. Yes. Right? Like, can't we take the path to joy? Can't we take that? And I'm not saying that we can't, we have to necessarily even experience like that pain and all that suffering in order to grow and evolve. And I know that a lot of people talk about that, like, oh, like the harder your life is, the more you can evolve. I like to think that we can evolve simply with the choice to do so. And not that I necessarily have to go through some hard hitting, awful, tragic trauma experience in order to evolve. And I think what's happened is the ego, again, over thousands of years, has told us that we need to go through that dark night of the soul for us to evolve. Okay, good, bad, light and dark. I get that. But what I'm trying to express here is that maybe that sense of pain, we can perceive it differently, and then we can choose a different path. So maybe we can choose a path where there's less suffering in that. So I just find that fascinating. And I want to add to your spell casting, because we think of the word broadcasting. That's our TV and our media. It's broadcasting. You know where the word broadcasting comes from? It's spell casting, but on a broader level. So we are being, inundated again with all of these fears, or think this way, or division, whatever it is. And again, it just reminds us that there's so much happening outside of us that is trying to hold us hostage, that is trying to keep us from really tapping into our inner technology. And we have incredible incredible inner technology. And so this is that reminder to all of you listening that you have this brilliant inner technology that you have access to. Don't forget it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the way that our bodies operate without our conscious control, like if we could listen to the things that are coming out of our subconscious mind, they give us so much information about how to get out from under those spells. They show us what we currently believe, what we are enjoying and are addicted to. I mean, think about people that are just addicted to the news, like
Big time.
all day, every day, hearing those. It's like, oh, you're giving up so much control. You're giving up so much of your own life and magic, and just letting people pour fear and scarcity into you.
Isn't it something? Yeah. It's you know, and at the same time, it's like this isn't about judgment or blame. It's about recognizing that, again, we've been conditioned in a certain way. So, like, there has been this conditioning upon, you know, century after century, ancestor line after ancestor line to get us to where we are today. And I think that this is a big time for a massive call out to remind people that they do have the power of free will, that do have these aspects within themselves that they can change their thinking, which then will change their feeling, which then will change, et cetera, right? So it's really about us standing in our own personal power. And when we have a strong sense of personal power, we don't have a desire to control anything outside of us anymore. When we know where we are and we've got that relationship or the relationships within ourselves anchored in, we don't have a need to have power over anybody else. People who try and control you is really oftentimes because they're lacking some sense of control within themselves, right?
Yes, exactly.
And so now it's like, okay, wait a second. I have power here. And I think that's a really, really important takeaway, is to remind us that we have not lost that, not yet anyways. And this is our
Yeah.
invitation for us to lean into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that brings up for me the truth is, like, we're always looking outside of ourselves for a sensation. Like, let's say we are craving a romantic partnership. We're
Mhm.
thinking, oh, the sensation of being loved comes from that person. But the only way we can feel that sensation is if it comes from within ourselves. All of our feelings, all of our emotions, our um, physical sensations start within our own bodies and minds.
Yeah.
And so
Yes.
I could be with a fantastic lover and have a terrible experience if I'm
Correct.
allowing my mind and my ego to tell me all kinds of scary stories about that person, and
Mhm.
whether my body looks good enough or not, and project, some kind of miserable experience that they might be having that they're not having. So you had
Right?
mentioned
Yeah.
becoming the observer.
Mhm.
When you're in the Akashic records, becoming the observer. When we start detaching ourselves from these stories that are on, I mean, so much of it is repetitive.
Right?
It's been
Yeah.
going on for, like you said, thousands of years. um, that when we can become the observer of that and not make it our identity and not
Yeah.
make it our source,
Yes.
we can start stepping away from those spells and that control. And when we recognize that, ah, in order to feel love, I have to choose to feel love. So love starts with me, and that's how we call in, a more aligned partnership, or
Yes.
a beautiful business. By feeling that sensation before it even has arrived in our outer world.
I'm so glad that you brought this up, because I think it's a lot of what people are missing, right? They're like, oh, I'll be happy when I get this career. I'll be happy when I find the love of my life. I played the I'll be happy when, folks, and I played it a long time, and I still had all the, but everything that we need is actually stored in-house. Everything that we need is right here. Everything that we need, every emotion, every feeling that we're craving outside of ourselves is available to us within ourselves. And so again, back to relationship. And by the way, you don't have to go to the Akashic records to be the observer. I mean, be the witness in your life, right? And allow yourself to choose slightly different thoughts versus the thoughts that aren't making you feel so good. Can we choose a way out of that? And I absolutely can. And so it becomes more of a conscious process for us where we're not escaping in the outside world and playing the I'll be happy when game, where we're actually going inward and we're saying, okay, what is this feeling really about? And where's the root of this feeling? And, or this thought, right? Where is this really coming from? And start asking questions and being more inquisitive within our own spirit. And when we do that, we start to shift our vibrational frequency, our makeup, it all starts to shift because now we're in this harmonious, beautiful embodiment and this connection within ourselves. And once we produced it here, the rest of the world is a mirror for us. And so this is how we really start to create this heaven on earth for ourselves. It has to be created here first. It's not coming from the outside in. It has to come from the inside out.
Yeah. So changing a thought pattern, that can be really difficult, right? Because they're very repetitive and they've been going on forever. And often we're not even aware of what they're saying because we've never been the observer. So if a person's just now attempting to approach life as an observer, like an example of changing a thought, to move out of victimization into empowerment would be like, life is happening to me. Let's switch it to life is happening for me.
There
and
you go.
We forget that, or when we don't know that these thoughts and stories create emotion, and then those emotions trigger like a hormonal response in our body.
Yes.
And then that is how our body becomes addicted. It becomes this loop and it keeps feeding the thought patterns and emotion patterns. So to stop it and to switch the thought. And so, like we talked about the addiction to suffering, like, okay, if I don't want to suffer anymore, what do I need to do? Because our subconscious mind doesn't work well with, I don't want that. Like,
yes,
it takes things very literally. So if I'm saying what I don't want, it's just going to keep bringing me more of that thing because negatives are not processing that way.
Yes.
So what do I want? What do I want to feel? How do I, so life is happening for me when I'm imagining, and it can start with what I don't want, right? We've got to see what's not working. But then when we're trying to go into manifestation and creating a new reality for ourselves, we can't be focused on the don't want. We
Correct.
just use that don't want as a tool that is a brief tool. Yeah. Like, okay, I don't want this. So what do I want? So now I'm going to visualize and be in the emotion of joy and pleasure. And I'm going to see what I do want and create from that place. And that can be really challenging when we've been in a very addictive pattern of repetitive thoughts and emotions for most of our lives and even generations.
Yeah. And so, I mean, giving ourselves grace, I think, as we uncover this and move through the process is so important, because again, we go back to beating on ourselves, right? The other thing that I wanted to bring up, because you reminded me of something as you were saying that, and we're not saying to like disregard it when we feel sad or grief. Like that's not what we're saying. We're saying, okay, become the witness that grief and that sadness. Okay. But then also consciously choose, okay, I don't really want to feel that. So what do I want? But I want to add to that too, because there's a beautiful way to alchemize the energy of anger, resentment, anything that we perceive as low vibration. Okay. And I want to remind people, we might say low vibration, but it has value. Okay. We're not saying it's bad. I want to make that really clear that the guilt and the shame and all of those things, I'm not saying those things are bad. They are showing up for us to learn something from, right? So when we have an emotion that we might perceive as bad, the invitation is not that you're like, oh, I'm just going to feel happy because I don't want to the sadness, but rather we have an opportunity to hold the sadness or hold the grief for whatever that low vibration energy is. And we have an opportunity to say, hey, I see you. And I invite my clients oftentimes to like cup their hands like they're holding a cute little bird or a bunny or something, right? And they look at that anger and they look at that sadness, whatever. Usually I'm bawling my eyes at this process, by the way. And I'm saying, okay, anger, I see that you're here again. And I'm mad that you're here. What do you want to show me? What do I need to learn? What's in this for me? And I have a conversation, sometimes heated, sometimes not. But regardless, I have a conversation with that energy. What happens with that energy, the anger, the resentment, whatever it is that you're dealing with, as soon as we see it and hear it, it's like, oh my God, they're listening to me. Oh, it's like a child, right? They just want our attention.
Yeah.
So as soon as we look at that energy and we say, okay, I see you, might not be happy you're here, but I see you and I know you have value for me. It changes the whole dynamic. That energy is not so dense anymore. Already it starts to alchemize that energy. So it's not as dense, it's not as intense. It says, oh yeah, she hears me or he gets me or whatever. And that energy starts to shift. Then from that place, we're able to say, okay, what's in it for me? I invite everyone to ask that question. Whenever you have an experience that doesn't go well, whenever you have an emotion that comes up, you say, okay, what's in this for me? There's something in this for me to learn. That's how we start to leverage. That's how we start to really alchemize and shift that energy and really receive all the value, because there's so much richness here. There's so much abundant here for us in the learning and in the growth. So I felt like it was important to share that so the audience understands, we're not talking about spiritual hijacking where you're like, oh no, I don't want to feel those feelings. It's going to feel blissful and happy. Honor those feelings, but then recognize that you have a conscious choice to make about whether or not you want to keep playing into the thinking and the thoughts that lead to those feelings. So we have this opportunity to consciously choose now, okay, I held the space for that anger. I got the value I needed out of that. Now I can consciously choose a different thought that brings a different feeling. Yeah. So it's about recognizing that we can hold space for what we perceive as low vibration. But more than that, we can actually leverage it. We can get value out of it. Your job is to get the value out of every experience and say, what's in it for me? And then from that place, then consciously choose, okay, well, how do I actually want to feel about this moving forward? Do I want to be bitter and resentful the rest of my life? Okay, if I do, fine. But if you don't, you've got the choice.
Yeah, I love that. It's so interesting because people feel like controlled by their emotions. And what we're saying here is it's kind of like a bully. Like if you keep your back turned and you keep running away from it and trying to escape that feeling of anger or resentment or sadness, it's going to maintain the upper hand. It's going to maintain control. If you turn around and face it and look at it and speak with it, it starts to be like, oh, you're not scared of me. Oh, I'm being heard. Okay, I'm being observed. And then you're in a dialogue and there's no control over you anymore. So we in our society really stigmatize any kind of mental health challenge. I mean, we would call having like long-term depression or resentment or anger like a mental health problem, and we might treat it with drugs. But really what it is just we're just not turning around and facing it. We're telling ourselves, oh, I moved on. I had that childhood experience or that early life experience and I'm just moving on with my life. But are you? Because you're filled with anger and resentment. So you haven't moved on. So it's time to turn around and face those feelings and actually hold them and actually witness them and see them and hear them and feel them. And then from there, you can start moving on. And those feelings are going to keep coming back. They're just not going to dominate you anymore because you're becoming the observer and the witness and you're having a dialogue with it.
Yep. Amen to that. I think there's such power in that. That reminds me of a little story that we oftentimes will use to reinforce this idea of like facing the fear or facing those emotions. And it's about the cows and the bison out in the field, and a storm is coming across the horizon. So the cows see the storm and they start running from the storm. Okay. Well, eventually the storm catches up to the cows, and now the cows are running with the storm. So now the cows have extra long time in the storm. The bison, however, they look at the storm, they see the storm, and the bison say, we're going to charge into that storm. So the bison head towards the storm. Because they head into the storm, that storm passes over them much more quickly. So the moral of the story is, don't be the cow, be the bison. But the point is, of course, that it is important for us to lean in when we're afraid, when we have a low vibration energy, when we have an experience that is difficult. The idea is not to run from it, but to lean in. And I know that we've been so conditioned to escape, and I'm the world's best escape artist. I will find a way in work, in pleasure, in whatever way to escape whatever that I'm supposed to be dealing with. So I can relate to that. But the invitation is to lean in, is to really allow yourself to say, hey, I see you there, and you're not going to have power over me. Let's figure this out together. Let's have a conversation. It's all about relationship at the end of the day, relationship with ourselves, because the relationship we have with ourselves will show up in all our extrinsic relationships too.
Yes.
So that's the key. And if we all are willing to do that work, I'm telling you, this world becomes healed and whole again.
Yes. And we do have time. We are not victims of time. We can choose to take the time to have the dialogue and the relationship with ourself and our parts and our stories. And that's really how we create success in every area of life. Love, money. Money is relationships. It's relationships with other people. There are no financial exchanges or transactions without two or more people being involved. Yeah. And so if we don't even have a grasp on what we're feeling and the stories that we're telling ourselves, how do we think we're going to relate with another person? Like, there's so much chatter going on in the background of two people's minds as they're relating with each other.
Right.
They're not present a lot of the time. And so how much value are you missing? And how many cues are you missing? How much trust is not there that really can be there if we consciously choose to have that energy, trust, love? Like, if we really look at people, none of us are really intentionally trying to hurt anybody. We all want the best. We really do. And we do have parts that'll show up as like gremlins, and sometimes those parts will take over on us. But that's what we're saying here. Like, if we can look at those parts and work with them before we're in an interaction with another person, or if we can observe them while we're in an interaction with another person,
even better. Yeah.
Yes, then we can really have better relationships, better outcomes in every area of life. Do you have any thoughts that you want to leave everyone with? I want to have you tell us how to work with you and where to find you, but also if you have a closing thought, that would be cool too.
Well, thank you. I've loved this conversation so much. Thank you for leading this beautiful dialogue that we've had today. There's a couple things, of course. I also have a podcast called When Spirit Calls, so people can check that out. But my ask is actually around my book. I just released a book called The Arc. It's still only available on my website, rosehope.ca. And this book is the story about my own experience in my near deaths in being with the angels, which I know we didn't get to talk about much today. But it's a story about a girl who goes on this incredible journey to the angel realm. And in that space, she learns about the Akashic records, the soul library, and all these wonderful nuggets of wisdom. And it really follows my own story of having these gifts, but closing them off because I didn't know what to do with them. And I didn't know if they were curses or gifts, and my whole journey in that. So it follows the storyline of another girl in that book. So it is technically a fantasy fiction novel, but with it has these potent lessons. And so that is available now. And of course, I always love to gift. And so I gift a complimentary Akashic reading. So anyone who's never had one before, in deep service through these sessions. And so that's a gift for you as well. So we'll make sure that that link's in the show notes for all of the audience members if they feel compelled to receive that gift.
Absolutely. I love that. And do take advantage of that, because that is a beautiful gift. And those are usually not complimentary. So,
Yes, this is something that Spirit has guided me to do. So I'll leave you with this little quote just to remind you that, that we really are being supplied for. And this is what Spirit has said to me time and time again. In every given moment, you have everything you need and then some. In every given moment, you have everything you need and then some. And so that's a reminder you're always being provided for.
I love that. Oh, this has been so amazing. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think we could have more conversations for sure. This has been awesome. So
I would love that.
let's
My
do
door's
that.
always open. Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Great.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Yes, we'll be in touch.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks, Rihanna. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.